Hi, I'm Hannah from Chez Hannie Patterns. Today I'm showing you how to make my new pattern, which is the Forget-Me-Not dress. I'm making mine entirely out of old t-shirts that I'm going to patchwork together. I've never done this before, so we can figure it out together and maybe you'll be inspired to do one too. Let's get started. Okay, the first thing I did actually was take photos of every t-shirt laying flat, and then I photoshopped them together. You can see this little design of what I kind of intended it to be. I don't think this is totally necessary. I was just doing it because, as you'll notice, these are all old t-shirts from a project my husband was doing for Grimes, and so they all have like Grimes written on them and then this same artwork printed on all. So I was trying to like get rid of as much of that as possible and cut around it, so it's more difficult kind of the way I was trying to piece it together, so that's why I did this. I mean, I think it's a good idea if you want to, but not totally necessary. So the first thing, I knew this was like a key t-shirt of the design, and I noticed that the collar size was similar in measurement to the one I needed for my shirt, so I removed the collar band from this t-shirt because I'm just going to upcycle and use the existing collar band to finish my dress. And then I just started cutting apart the t-shirts like along the shoulder seams and side seams and removing the sleeves so I could have flat panels to work with, and then using those to start patchworking together. Unfortunately, I needed part of the neck area, so I had to patch in a little piece there. And now I'm moving on to the back, just kind of laying out the shoulders, where I made my first mistake cutting the piece to the exact size of the pattern. Don't do that. You want to leave as much extra as you can at this point because you might have to shift the pieces around later, so leave a few inches on each side of what you think the final pattern measurement is going to be, so that you have that flexibility later on. I'm struggling here with the front now because this International Space Station was like my favorite shirt and it was like a huge part of the design, but it's such a good shirt and the fabric like texture was so nice, so I just decided to pull it out and save it, and maybe I can make a little mini dress or something out of it. But I think getting rid of it made me feel better to keep moving on and start cutting up the other shirts. So started patching them all together. Basically, you know, if you know how to quilt, this might be easier for you, but I am not a quilter, so I was just figuring this out and kind of like overlocking two pieces together, and then overlocking that to the other one, and didn't really have a huge plan and method, but I will explain the method that I came up with later. But just so you can see kind of what my process was, just cutting out rough square-ish shapes and like laying them where I want them, kind of figuring out how the seams are going to be attaching together, and then taking that to the machine, overlocking, and then joining that to the next piece, and so on. I wanted the construction to look really intentional, so on top of my overlock I did a single needle top stitch, and so I'm just pressing it all out because that kind of made the fabric a little wavy. Okay, here is the collage for the front of the dress and how it all came together. I learned some things as I was going along. I was really struggling up here, but then like piecing them together. So now I realize what I should have done is like cut kind of squares and then like join these two squares, knowing that's half of the top, this is the other half of the top, so this seam after I join those squares, and then like do this row here, 1 2 3 together in the middle, and then join that onto the bottom there and kind of work my way down. Also, this pattern is kind of crazy because it curves significantly, so I had to like curve the pieces, but we got there. Other thing I'm noticing, like these two t-shirts are a lot lighter weight than some of these other ones, so there is some kind of like waviness happening, which I'm hoping won't be too noticeable based on the design. You know, I was prioritizing the color palette I wanted over technical aspects of the fabric, but finding stuff that's more similar in weight, which might be more beneficial to like visual cleanliness, if that's a concern. So I overlocked everything And then I did these top stitch finishings to kind of seal the overlock, or whatever, connect through the overlock, just to make it look more finished on the outside. Then I had to press everything because it was kind of wavy. These are just regular single needle stitching because I only have a single needle machine, but I guess you could do a zigzag and that might make it not as wavy. I don't know, you'll have to experiment. This one got a little crazy, but luckily it still looks nice. Feeling good about this. So now I'm going to cut it out and do the back, and let's see. I'm gonna cut it on the floor here because this is easier, but something else I just remembered to mention is that I'm leaving a lot of extra on the sides here because I realized as I was piecing it together I didn't have that much control over exactly where everything ended up because I was kind of just doing it intuitively and not really taking any measurements. So having as much extra as possible is ideal, so you can kind of shift it around and make sure, you know, the things that are most important to you. Like I don't want to cut off this word women in science part, that's like a key part of the design. So I left enough extra so that I can shift things around, especially as this is like curving and I didn't really know where it was gonna end up. So yeah. So here's the final look on the front. As you can see, the skirt ends up hanging on bias, so it's important that you're following the grain line on the pattern and keeping it all straight, and so when you assemble it, it will be on bias. Keep that in mind, it will change the direction. Now I'm moving on to the back using what I learned, so kind of laying out my rows so that I can assemble it in rows and cutting large squares. This tie-dye square, I should have made it larger, so even then it was kind of not big enough, so really you should have like 4 inches minimum, let's say, on each side. But I was cutting all the squares, kind of starting to piece it together, figure out how to get the parts that I want, running out of t-shirts that didn't have the word Grimes on them, and trying to just make it work and not waste a bunch more, so using as many of the little scraps as I could to create the pieces. So there were some smaller patchwork pieces on the back here that I ended up having to do, and then I really wanted these little Marios that were on this gray shirt, so I just made them into their own little patch and put it on top of the gray. I also really liked how on the front the seams being diagonal really breaks up like the grid and kind of squareness of the patchwork. So I added the one diagonal seam at the bottom in the gray with the little Marios, and I felt like that was a nice little thing to tie the front and the back together. So now I'm cutting out the back and I'm cutting out the tie pieces, and that's it. All in, this process took me about 10 hours. The sewing construction of just the dress probably takes an hour and a half, so just keep that in mind when you're planning your project, and stay tuned for the next video where I assemble the final dress.